If you had seen me on the morning my old life ended, you never would have guessed that by midnight I would be standing in front of a mirror, trembling in a borrowed dress, whispering a new name to my own reflection like it was a prayer I was terrified to believe. And that is why I call this story my new rebirth, because it did not begin with confidence or beauty or applause. It began with panic, denial, and the awful cracking sound of a life that had been built too tightly around a person I was pretending to be. For most of my life I had been good at pretending. I was good at lowering my voice when I got excited, good at hiding the softness in my gestures, good at laughing when other men made jokes that landed like stones in my stomach, good at acting like the unease I felt every time I saw myself in a mirror was normal and temporary, and somehow everybody must feel it. I grew up in a small town where people had a way of noticing everything and understanding almost nothing. My father believed in straight lines, firm handshakes, and silence. My mother believed in survival. She loved me in the cautious way people love when they have learned that too much honesty can blow a family apart. I was their only child, which meant I was not just a son. I was a role, a future, a promise, and every year that passed made that role feel heavier on my shoulders. When I was little, I did not have words like gender dysphoria or transition or identity. I only had moments that felt like secrets. I remember standing in my mother's room while she was at work, staring at the open closet door as if it were a doorway to another universe. It was not even about fashion then. It was about permission. The dresses hanging there looked like lives that could move, breathe, soften, and belong. I would reach out and touch the fabric with the back of my fingers, feeling something so sharp and tender rise in me that I would pull my hand away like I had touched fire. The first time I tried one on I was 11, home alone, heart beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. It was a simple blue house dress, a little too long, a little too loose, and completely wrong for me in every practical sense, but the second it slipped over my body, I felt something so startling that I almost cried. Not happiness exactly, because happiness is light and easy, and this was enormous and frightening, but recognition. It was as if I had spent my whole life hearing my own name mispronounced, and suddenly, finally, someone said it correctly. Then I caught sight of myself in the mirror, awkward, broad-shouldered, terrified, half child and half ghost, and shame rushed in so fast it stole the air from my lungs. I tore it off, folded it badly, and promised myself I would never do that again. That promise lasted 9 days. The years after that were made of repeating patterns. Denial, hunger, secrecy, relief, guilt. I became an expert in erasing evidence. I learned how to leave drawers exactly as I found them, how to wash mascara off with shaking hands, how to lock my bedroom door with one foot while listening for the sound of a car in the driveway. But the deeper secret was not the clothes. The clothes were only the one language I knew. The deeper secret was that every glimpse of myself in softness made the rest of my life feel unbearable by comparison. When puberty hit, it felt like a betrayal I could not stop. My jaw sharpened, my voice dropped, my body became heavier and stranger. Every new masculine feature drew applause from the outside world and grief from somewhere buried inside me. People said I was becoming a young man. I felt like I was being buried alive in one. By the time I was 18, I had built an entire survival system out of compartmentalization. Public me was efficient, polite, forgettable. Private me existed in fragments, mostly late at night, mostly in silence, mostly with a mirror I hated and needed in equal measure. I left town for college, and thought distance would solve me. It did not. It only gave me privacy, and privacy turned the volume up on everything I had been suppressing. The city was bigger, louder, more anonymous, and for the first time in my life I saw people who looked like they belonged to themselves. I saw women who had broad shoulders and deep voices and radiant confidence. I saw people whose existence unsettled every lie I had been told about what was possible. I also saw how cruel the world could be to them, how strangers stared, how some laughed, how others looked away with that brittle discomfort people wear when reality does not flatter their worldview. I should tell you that I did not become brave overnight. I did the opposite. I retreated. I told myself I was only curious, only experimenting, only coping with stress. I bought cheap clothes online under a fake name and had them delivered to a parcel locker across town. I learned makeup from silent tutorials at 2 in the morning, pausing and rewinding until my eyes burned. I bought a wig that looked absurd on me and wore it anyway, sitting alone in my apartment on the edge of my bed, staring at my reflection as if I were waiting for a stranger to speak first. Sometimes I would look almost right in the blur of low light and tired eyes. Sometimes I would look so painfully wrong that I would collapse inward for days. I hated the word crossdressing when people used it like a punchline, like a trick, like a costume, because nothing about what I felt was theatrical. There was no wink in it, no joke, no thrill of disguise. If anything, it felt like removing a disguise and finding another one underneath. I dated once in college, a quiet girl named Rachel who liked old bookstores and peppermint tea. She told me I seemed sad in a way that did not match my life. I laughed it off. She asked me one night, while rain tapped against the apartment windows and the room smelled like wet concrete and chamomile, if I had ever felt like I was living someone else's script. I almost told her then. I almost cracked open right there and spilled the whole truth onto the floor between us. Instead I said, sometimes, and she nodded like that was enough. But it wasn't. We lasted 6 months. When she left, she said, I don't think you're lying to me exactly. I think you're disappearing. I remembered that sentence for years. I think part of me knew even then that the story I was trying to force myself into could only end one way, with me vanishing so completely that even I would not know where to find myself. After college, I took a stable office job because stability is what people choose when they are afraid of what desire might cost them. I rented a neat apartment, paid my bills on time, made my voice flatter, my posture stiffer, my laugh smaller. I became the kind of person nobody worries about because nobody imagines anything dramatic could be happening inside him. But the truth was I was unraveling. It happened quietly, not with one big collapse, but with a series of tiny fractures. I stopped looking in mirrors. I stopped taking photos. I started staying up later and later, spending hours dressed in private, sitting by the window with the lights off, watching other people pass below, wondering how many of them were also carrying whole hidden lives inside their ribs. Sometimes I would speak out loud in a softer voice, trying names on like fragile glass slippers.
Mia, Claire,
Nina, Elena. Elena made me pause. Elena felt warm and deep and strangely familiar, like a melody I had heard before I was born. I stopped using it for a week because it scared me too much. Then I wrote it on a piece of paper and hid it inside a book. Then I wrote it again. Then on the steam-fogged bathroom mirror after a shower, where it vanished before morning. My rebirth did not begin with choosing that name, though. It began with being caught. People always imagine getting caught is the worst thing that can happen to a secret, but that depends on what the secret is doing to you. In my case, the secret was slowly eating my life. The person who caught me was not my father, not a stranger, not some cruel twist of fate. It was my younger coworker, Jonah, who came by my apartment one Sunday afternoon because I had forgotten my laptop charger at the office and he was dropping it off on his way to his sister's place. I was not expecting anyone. I opened the door wearing leggings, an oversized sweater, half-done eyeliner, and the wrong wig. It should have been funny. It should have been absurd. Instead, the world froze. Jonah froze too. His eyes widened, then softened, then darted away because he was trying very hard not to stare. I remember gripping the door so hard my knuckles hurt. Neither of us spoke for what felt like a year. Then he held out the charger and said, very gently, I can come back later. That softness broke me more than mockery would have. I took the charger with shaking hands and heard myself say, wait. My voice sounded thin and wrecked. He stood there, uncertain, while I tried to decide in the space of one heartbeat whether I was going to lie, laugh, slam the door, or finally tell the truth to another human being. The truth won, maybe because I was too exhausted to keep guarding it. This isn't a joke, I said. I know, he replied. I let him in. We sat in my living room, which suddenly looked incriminating in every direction. A lipstick tube on the coffee table. A pair of flats by the couch. A scarf hanging over the chair. Evidence everywhere. I expected questions. I expected awkwardness. What I did not expect was patience. Jonah sat with his elbows on his knees, eyes lowered, letting me choose my own pace. I told him I did not know what I was. I told him this had been happening for years. I told him I felt normal only in moments that made me hate myself afterward. I told him I was terrified that if I said too much out loud it would become real and destroy everything. When I finally stopped, the room felt hollowed out. Jonah was quiet a long time. Then he said, "My sister's trans." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. He nodded. "She came out 3 years ago. We didn't get everything right at first, but she's okay now. Better than okay, actually. Happier than I've ever seen her." My heart slammed so hard I thought I might be sick. Hope can be more frightening than despair when you have built your life around not needing it. "I'm not saying that means anything about you," he added quickly. "I'm just saying you don't have to figure it out by yourself." I wish I could tell you I stepped into the light right then, that I called a therapist that evening, came out the next morning, and never looked back. But real transformation is rarely cinematic in the clean way people want it to be. Real transformation is messy and repetitive and full of retreat. For 2 weeks after Jonah left, I avoided him at work, mortified by my own honesty. Then one day, he placed a folded note beside my keyboard and walked away. Inside was a first name, a phone number, and 5 words. "She helped my sister a lot." It was a gender therapist. I carried that note in my wallet for 3 months before I used it. The day I called, my voice shook so badly that the receptionist asked if I wanted a minute. I nearly hung up. Instead, I said yes, took a breath, and booked the appointment. Walking into that office the first time felt like stepping onto a stage where the audience might finally tell me whether I was mad, broken, pretending, or real. The waiting room smelled like lavender and old paper. There were soft chairs, a muted lamp, a shelf full of books about grief, identity, trauma, and healing. When the therapist, Dr. Levin, opened the door and smiled at me, I had the bizarre urge to apologize for existing. In that first session, I talked around the truth so carefully that we spent 40 minutes orbiting it. Finally, she asked, "When do you feel most like yourself?" The simplicity of the question destroyed me. Not who do you want to be? Not what are you trying to become? Just when do you feel most like yourself? I cried so hard I could barely answer. "When I'm not pretending to be him," I said. That sentence hung in the air between us like a bridge that had appeared out of nowhere. Therapy did not hand me a label, but it handed me honesty. Over months of sessions, I said things aloud that I had never let myself think to the end. I admitted that dressing in women's clothes was not a hobby or a release. It was the closest I came to relief. I admitted that I envied women not because I wanted them, but because I wanted to move through the world as one. I admitted that the mirror hurt because it reflected a compromise, not a self. I admitted that my fantasy was not being admired, it was being recognized. Dr. Levin never pushed me toward a conclusion. She only kept holding the door open while I stood there shaking. Then one evening, after a session that left me feeling scraped raw, I went home, stood in front of my mirror in a simple cardigan and skirt, wiped my mascara, took off the wig, and looked straight at my own face, without flinching for the first time in years. "You are not a man who likes dressing as a woman," I whispered. "You are a woman who has been hiding in a man's life." The silence afterward was enormous. So was the relief. Terror came a second later, but relief came first. That mattered. Once the truth had language, everything changed. Not quickly, not smoothly, but irreversibly. I told Jonah first. We were in a coffee shop after work, rain blurring the windows, steam curling from our cups. I could barely lift my eyes from the table. "I think I know," I said. "Okay," he replied, calm as ever. "I'm trans." The word looked impossible in the air. He did not blink. He smiled, small and warm.
"Hi," he said.
"Hi," I echoed, and we both laughed in that ridiculous, teary, disbelieving way people laugh when something huge and fragile has finally been named. He asked if I had a name I wanted to try. My throat closed up. "Elena," I said. He nodded once, like the world had simply clicked into place. "Hi, Elena." I can still feel that moment in my bones. Not because it solved anything, but because it was the first time another person met me where I was instead of where I had been performing. After that, the world did not magically become kind. In some ways, it became harder, because now I was no longer running from a fog. I was facing a road. There were practical steps and emotional earthquakes and 1,000 humiliating little firsts. The first time I bought makeup in person, my hands shook so badly, I dropped a compact on the floor. The cashier did not care at all, which somehow made me want to cry. The first time I wore a simple blouse and jeans outside after dark, I felt every pair of eyes on the street even when nobody was looking. The first time I heard a stranger say, "Ma'am," to me in passing, I floated for hours. The first time someone snickered from across a parking lot, I went home and sat in the shower until the water ran cold. I began building a private life that was no longer fully private. I joined an online support group, then a local one. The first support meeting took place in the back room of a community center painted a color that was trying very hard to be cheerful. I almost turned around at the door. Inside were a dozen people at different stages of becoming, some polished, some trembling, some older than my parents, some barely out of high school, all carrying stories I recognized before I heard them. One woman, tall and elegant with silver hair and red nails, said, "Most of us spent years thinking we were alone. That's one of the cruelest parts." Another laughed and said, "And then you meet a room full of versions of yourself." I did not speak much that first night, but I listened, and with every story the walls around my own life lost a little of their power. I met Lena there, which is still funny to me because her name sounded so close to mine that we accidentally answered each other for weeks. She was bold where I was cautious, sharp where I was soft, the kind of woman who made eye contact like she had signed a treaty with herself a long time ago. She had transitioned 5 years earlier and had the unnerving habit of spotting lies before I finished telling them. "You're still negotiating with the ghost of the person other people wanted," she said to me one night as we walked to the subway after group. "You have to stop asking that ghost for permission." I did not know how to do that. "Neither did I," she said. "You do it scared." I started presenting as Elena in safe spaces first, then on errands farther from my neighborhood, then at group, then during whole weekends spent exploring parts of the city where nobody knew me. Each time it got a fraction easier and a fraction more impossible to go back. The divide between my two lives became unbearable. Monday through Friday, I still wore men's office clothes, spoke in my trained voice, answered to my old name, and felt like I was climbing into a coffin every morning. Nights and weekends I became fuller, brighter, more present. The contrast sharpened until it was physically painful. I started waking with dread so intense it sat on my chest. My work did not suffer, which almost made things worse, because from the outside I looked functional. From the inside, I felt split down the middle. Dr. Levin asked me one afternoon, "How long do you think you can survive this divided?" I knew the answer before she finished the question. Not long. Coming out at work became the next cliff edge. I wish I could tell you I was noble about it, but honestly I delayed until my body forced the issue. I got sick constantly that winter, little stress fevers, migraines, sleeplessness, chest-tightening anxiety every Sunday night. One morning I threw up in the office bathroom before 10 o'clock and sat on the cold tile floor thinking, this is not sustainable. That afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with HR. The manager handling employee concerns was a woman named Priya with measured eyes and a voice that made space rather than filling it. I had written myself notes. I had rehearsed whole speeches. When I sat down across from her, every prepared sentence vanished. "I'm transgender," I blurted. "I need to transition at work." She blinked once, then nodded as if I had requested an ergonomic chair. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "How would you like us to support you?" The normalcy of her response nearly folded me in half. I had braced for confusion, discomfort, a polite disaster. Instead, I got a checklist, a plan, and human decency. Not everyone in the office reacted well, of course. Some were kind immediately. Some tried and stumbled. Some avoided me for weeks, as if gender might be contagious. One older supervisor kept calling me by my old name, by accident, so often that the pattern became its own answer. But there were surprises too. The receptionist I had barely spoken to brought me tea on the day of the announcement, because she remembered I liked chamomile. A man from accounting who had once seemed intimidating stopped by my desk and said, awkwardly but sincerely, "My nephew's trans. If anybody gives you trouble, tell me." Even the people who failed me taught me something. They taught me that I had spent too much of my life overestimating the power of other people's confusion. Some confusion dissolves when you stop shrinking around it. Social transition was not one moment, but 100. Updating my name in group chats. Hearing Elena spoken across a conference room. Watching email signatures change. Correcting pronouns with a smile, so steady it felt stitched to my face. Learning what styles actually suited my body instead of wearing what I thought a woman was supposed to wear. Realizing femininity was not a costume with one correct formula, but a language vast enough to hold me without making me pretend. I made mistakes. God, I made so many. I wore the wrong shades, the wrong cuts, the wrong shoes for walking 6 city blocks. I contoured like I was renovating architecture. I bought a coat that made me look like a dramatic curtain. I panicked about my voice, my hands, my shoulders, my jaw, my every angle and motion. Yet slowly, beneath all the noisy self-critique, something steadier emerged. I was no longer playing at being someone. I was practicing being visible. The hardest conversation, however, still waited for me like a storm on the horizon. My parents. I postponed telling them until postponing became its own cruelty. My mother called every Sunday. My father joined the line sometimes and asked practical questions about weather, money, work. They still saw the son they had raised. Every week I lied by omission and felt smaller afterward. Finally, one night in early spring, after staring at my phone for an hour with my heart battering itself against my ribs, I called my mother and asked if she and Dad could come visit the next weekend. She asked if something was wrong. Yes, I said, and then, because the old fear of honesty was still alive, I added, but maybe also right. They arrived Saturday afternoon carrying a store-bought pie and the kind of brittle cheer parents bring when they sense a family announcement and are praying it is not catastrophic. I had cleaned the apartment twice. I had hidden nothing. When my mother set the pie on the counter, her eyes caught on the cardigan draped over a chair, the makeup bag near the bathroom, the framed print I had bought of a woman standing in morning light. She noticed. She did not ask. My father looked around once, jaw tightening the way it did when he felt a world shifting under his feet. We sat in the living room. The silence before I spoke felt geological. "I need to tell you something about who I am," I said. My hands were so cold they barely felt attached to me. My mother clasped hers together. My father leaned back as if preparing for impact. I told them the shortened version first, then the longer one, when silence followed. I told them this had been part of me for years. I told them I had tried to ignore it, bury it, fix it, outlast it. I told them I was transgender. I told them the name Elena. I told them I was transitioning. My mother cried instantly, not loudly, just with tears that seemed to arrive from some deep old reservoir. My father did not cry. He went very still, which was worse. "No," he said after a long minute. Just that one word, flat as a locked door. "Dad," I began. "No," he stood up, paced 2 steps, turned. "This is confusion. Or pressure. Or people filling your head with nonsense." My mother whispered his name, but he kept going, years of certainty rising like armor around him. "You are my son." I had known this might happen. Knowing did not soften it. "I know that's who you think I am," I said, voice shaking despite my effort. "But I've been trying to be that person my whole life, and it's killing me." Something in my mother's face changed then. Not acceptance yet. Not understanding. Recognition. She looked at me the way people look at a photograph they have seen for years, but only just realized contains a hidden figure in the background. "Is that why you were always so unhappy?" she asked quietly. The room went silent. I nodded. She covered her mouth. My father looked from her to me with the stunned anger of a man discovering that his map has never matched the territory. He left the apartment for 20 minutes and walked around the block. Those were the longest 20 minutes of my life. I sat on the couch with my mother while she cried and held my wrist like she was checking whether I was still here. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. I wanted to say because I was afraid you would look at me exactly like this. Instead, I said, because I didn't know if I'd survive losing you. When my father returned, he looked older. Not softer, but older. He sat down and stared at the floor. I don't understand this, he said. I may never understand it. I waited. But I can see this is not a game to you. It was not acceptance. It was not even close. But it was the first crack in the wall. They left that evening carrying the untouched pie. My mother hugged me so tightly I felt her heartbeat. My father hesitated, then put one hand awkwardly on my shoulder. It felt like a man reaching across a canyon without admitting there was one. After they drove away, I sat on the floor and sobbed until Lena came over with takeout and tissues and the kind of silence that does not demand performance. You told the truth, she said when I could finally speak. Sometimes that's the whole victory for one day. The months after coming out to my parents were strange and uneven. My mother called more often, asking practical questions in a voice that tried to hide its fragility. She slipped once and called me Elena, then corrected herself, then cried because the correction hurt more than the mistake. My father stopped calling for nearly 6 weeks. When he finally did, he asked about work, then the weather, then after a long pause said, "How are you doing?" The question was clumsy and monumental. I said, "Better." He did not respond right away. Then he said, "All right." That was how we began again, inch by inch, sentence by sentence. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I made the decision to begin medical transition. That sentence sounds clean in hindsight. It was not clean. It was full of forms, blood tests, long appointments, fear, excitement, and the sobering knowledge that hope becomes real work once you choose it. The first appointment with the endocrinologist felt surreal. I sat in a paper gown under fluorescent light, answering questions about my body, my mental health, my goals, my expectations. The doctor was kind but direct, careful not to sell miracles. Hormones, she explained, would not rewrite my life overnight. They would alter it quietly, gradually, unpredictably.
Softening.
Redistribution. Emotional shifts. Slowness. Patience. She spoke in medical language, but beneath every clinical phrase I heard a different translation. You are allowed to move toward yourself. The day I held that first prescription in my hand, I cried in the pharmacy parking lot until I laughed at myself for crying in so many parking lots over the course of this journey. There should be a memorial plaque somewhere for all the versions of me that dissolved in parked cars. I expected the first day of hormones to feel thunderous. It felt ordinary. I swallowed the first pill at my kitchen table with a glass of water and then looked around the apartment as if the walls might applaud. Nothing happened. The fridge hummed. A bus sighed to a stop outside. Light crawled across the floor. But inside that ordinary moment was an extraordinary fact. For the first time in my life, I was no longer only enduring my body. I was in conversation with it. Changes came slowly, then all at once, then slowly again. My skin softened first, or maybe I only imagined it because I wanted to. My emotions sharpened in ways that startled me. I cried more easily, yes, but the more surprising change was that joy also became easier to feel. Not bigger, exactly. Less obstructed. It was like someone had been turning down all my internal volume for years, and now the world was coming back online. I found myself smiling on the subway for no reason. I found myself moved by music I had heard 100 times. I found myself less numb, which sounds wonderful until you realize numbness had also been protecting me from pain. There were weeks when dysphoria hit harder than ever because now I had admitted what I wanted and my reflection still lagged behind my hope. There were mornings when I felt radiant and evenings when a single angle of my face in bad bathroom lighting could wreck me. Transition did not erase insecurity. It gave insecurity something more precious to threaten. But it also gave me resilience. Every difficult day had a destination now. Every small change mattered. The first time I noticed my face softening in photos, I stared at the screen so long my phone dimmed. The first time I caught my reflection unexpectedly in a shop window and did not recoil, I had to stop walking. The first time a barista asked for my name and I said Elena without the old panic tightening my throat, I floated through the rest of the afternoon like gravity had briefly loosened its rules. Still, suspense has a way of finding you even in the middle of rebirth. Just when I thought I had learned how to carry my new life, my old town called me back. My grandmother, my father's mother, had suffered a stroke. It was not fatal, but it was serious and my parents needed help. The thought of returning there as Elena filled me with a dread so primal it almost made me refuse. That town held every earlier version of me. Every hallway where I had lowered my shoulders to hide softness. Every store where people knew my family. Every memory of being watched. "You don't have to go," Lena said. "I do," I replied, and I knew it was true. Not just for my grandmother. For me. If I could not enter the landscape of my fear as myself, then some part of me would keep believing the old lie that I only belonged in borrowed spaces. So I went. The bus ride home felt like traveling backward through my own fossils. Familiar exits. Familiar flat fields. Familiar sky. I wore a simple sweater dress, boots, light makeup, and the quiet terror of a person returning to the scene of her own disappearance. My mother met me at the station first. She saw me step off the bus, blinked hard, and for one dreadful second I thought she might look away. Instead, she opened her arms. "Elena," she said, voice unsteady, and held me so tightly that years seemed to bend around us. I nearly collapsed from relief. My father was harder. He stood by the car, jaw tense, trying not to stare at the visible reality of what he had previously only heard described. I walked toward him with my heartbeat pounding in my throat. He looked at me for a long moment, then took my suitcase and said, "Your grandmother's in room 214. It was not warm, but it was not rejection. In our family, sometimes logistics were the first language of care. The hospital was full of fluorescent exhaustion. My grandmother had always been sharp-tongued, dramatic, and impossible to intimidate, even at 80. When she saw me, she frowned in confusion for a brief second, then peered harder. "Well," she rasped, "that explains a lot." I stared at her. My mother gasped. Even my father looked shocked. My grandmother, weak and pale and still somehow commanding the room, lifted one paper-thin hand and crooked a finger at me. I leaned closer. "You always looked miserable as a boy," she whispered. "Terrible posture." Then, with the faintest spark of mischief in her eyes, she added, "You wear womanhood better than misery." I laughed so suddenly I cried. My mother cried too. My father looked like the earth had tilted. Later, in the cafeteria over terrible coffee, my mother admitted that my grandmother had once asked her, years ago, whether I might be one of those children who bloom late in the wrong garden. My mother had brushed it off at the time. "Maybe she knew before any of us," my mother said softly. That visit changed something. Not because the town became magically safe or accepting. It did not. I caught stares at the pharmacy. I heard an old classmate misgender me on purpose from 3 aisles away in the grocery store. I saw confusion, curiosity, whispered recognition.
But I also survived it.
More than that, I remained myself through it. My grandmother's stubborn blessing became a shield I did not know I needed. My father, meanwhile, witnessed something he could not dismiss. I was not performing rebellion, not chasing trend, not collapsing into confusion. I was caring for family, making coffee, adjusting hospital pillows, arguing gently with nurses, laughing with my mother, existing with a steadiness that no longer resembled the son he had imagined, but also no longer resembled a crisis. It resembled a daughter. On the last night before I returned to the city, he knocked on the guest room door. I was sitting at the vanity my mother had set up for me, wiping off mascara. He stood in the doorway a long time, hat in hand like he had wandered into the wrong church. "Your grandmother likes you," he said at last. I smiled despite myself. "She's known me a long time." He nodded, looked down, then back up. "I've been angry," he said. "Not because of you. Or maybe because of what it means about how little I saw." The honesty stunned me. My father was not a man who narrated feelings. "I thought being a good father meant teaching you how to be strong," he went on. "I didn't know I was teaching you how to hide." The room blurred instantly through tears. He took one awkward step forward. I can't promise I'll get everything right overnight, he said. But I don't want to lose my child because I was too proud to learn a new way to love her. Her. The word landed like sunrise. I cried into my hands. He stood there helpless for about 2 seconds, then crossed the room and hugged me in that stiff, bewildered, fiercely sincere way only fathers like mine can. We were both shaking. I'm sorry, he whispered, so quietly I nearly missed it. I know, I said, because forgiveness had already begun. After that, my life did not turn perfect, but it turned mine. There is a difference. My legal name change came 6 months later, and if you have never stood before a judge waiting to hear the old name peeled off you like dead bark, let me tell you that bureaucracy can sometimes feel like sacrament. The courtroom was small, fluorescent, unimpressed by human drama. When the judge signed the order and said, "Congratulations, Ms. Marlowe," I felt the world align by a fraction so precise and so profound that I had to sit down afterward in the hallway to breathe. Elena Marlowe, a name once written secretly on scraps of paper, now lived in the architecture of the state. I called my mother first.
She cried.
I called Jonah second. He shouted loud enough to distort the speaker. I called Lena third and she said, "See? Told you the ghost didn't own the house." Work improved too. Not flawlessly, but truly. The people who had resisted either adapted or faded into irrelevance. New hires only knew me as Elena. There is a special kind of healing in being introduced to someone with the correct name and no footnote attached, as if your existence were not a revision but an original text. I found my style gradually. Not hyperfeminine, not severe, but a balance that felt like me. Soft knits, clean lines, silver earrings, boots that made me feel grounded, lipstick on days when I wanted courage visible. My voice training became less about sounding perfect and more about sounding free. The first recording I made of myself after months of practice startled me. I did not sound like the woman in my dreams exactly, but I sounded like someone who had finally stopped apologizing for taking up sonic space. Love found me when I was least theatrical about needing it. Her name was Mara, and she entered my life through the least romantic doorway possible, a board game night hosted by one of Jonah's friends. She was funny in the dry, delayed way that sneaks up on you 3 seconds late and makes you laugh twice. She had dark curls, thoughtful hands, and the unnerving ability to look at people as if she were listening with more than her ears. I expected attraction. I did not expect ease. On our third date, we walked along the river at dusk, city lights trembling on the water, and she asked me, without flinching or fetishizing or framing me as an exception, what did it feel like when you finally stopped pretending? I thought about the years of secret mirrors, panic, hope, grief, family, hormones, names, trains, coffee shops, tears and parked cars, and said, like suffocating in a locked room and then realizing the door had been unlocked for a while, but I had to be the one to turn the handle. She took my hand. "I'm glad you did," she said. The old version of me would have distrusted happiness like that. The new one was learning not to. Not because joy was guaranteed, but because I had earned the right to inhabit it without suspicion. There were still difficult days. Let nobody sell you the lie that transition ends in flawless certainty. My body remained a site of negotiation, gratitude, grief, and astonishment. Some relationships never recovered. A few relatives used politeness as camouflage for distance. Strangers could still be cruel, and the political climate could turn ordinary existence into a debate I never consented to join. But the center held. That was new. Before, my life had been organized around avoidance. Now it was organized around truth. Even pain felt different when it was no longer in service of a lie. 2 years after I started hormones, my grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep. At the funeral, I stood beside my parents in a black dress and winter coat while old town eyes assessed, calculated, remembered. I was not invisible anymore, but I was not ashamed either. During the reception afterward, one of my grandmother's friends squeezed my hand and said, "She showed us your photo." She was very proud of her granddaughter. I had to step outside into the cold air because my chest could not hold all that tenderness without breaking open. My father came out a minute later and stood beside me under a pale gray sky. "She would have liked this coat," he said. I laughed through tears. He glanced at me, then added with a small, crooked smile, "Better posture too." We both looked up at the clouds and let grief do what it does when it is allowed to sit beside love. Sometimes people ask when I knew for sure. It is a fair question, but not one with a single answer. I knew in fragments long before I admitted it. I knew in every ache of envy that was really recognition. I knew in every mirror that hurt because it was lying by consensus. I knew in the relief of soft fabric against skin that had been starved of permission. I knew in the names I whispered to steam and darkness. I knew in the word Elena when it arrived like memory rather than invention. But if you ask when I truly believed it, when I stopped treating my own identity like a suspect and started treating it like a homecoming, I think the answer is this. I believed it the first time I realized I wanted a future. Before transition, I only wanted escape, numbness, postponement, sleep. Afterward, even in the hardest months, I wanted next year. I wanted to see what my face would look like in spring light. I wanted to hear my mother say my name more easily. I wanted to surprise myself. I wanted to become acquainted with happiness instead of just visiting it in secret. That is how rebirth works, at least in my experience. It is not magic. It is not vanity. It is not a sudden costume change under a spotlight while triumphant music swells. Rebirth is quieter and more demanding than that. It asks whether you are willing to disappoint the narrative that kept you alive in order to discover the truth that can finally let you live. It asks whether you can withstand being misunderstood without returning to self-betrayal for shelter. It asks whether you can mourn the years lost without sacrificing the years still possible. It asks whether you can look at the frightened person you used to be and forgive them for surviving the only way they knew how. I can now. I forgive the child in the blue dress who thought shame was the price of recognition. I forgive the teenager who mistook secrecy for safety. I forgive the young man costume I wore until it nearly fused to my skin. I forgive the woman in the bad wig who opened the door one Sunday and thought her life was ending when it was finally, quietly beginning. If you saw me now, you might not notice anything dramatic at first. You would see a woman in a long coat buying groceries, answering texts, laughing too hard at small jokes, adjusting an earring in a shop window, carrying a life that from the outside no longer looks like a crisis. That is part of the miracle too. I used to think I wanted transformation to make me extraordinary. The truth is, I wanted it to make me ordinary in the most beautiful sense of that word. I wanted the right to exist without internal war. I wanted to wake up and begin the day as myself instead of assembling a disguise strong enough to survive it. I wanted to hear my own name and not flinch. I wanted to inhabit my reflection instead of negotiating with it. I wanted a life I did not need to escape from. And I got one, not all at once, not for free, not without tears and losses and terror and courage I did not know I possessed, but I got one. So when I say my new rebirth, I do not mean I became someone else. I mean I finally stopped dying as someone I wasn't. I mean I crossed the long dark distance between performance and personhood and discovered that on the other side of all that fear was not a fantasy, not perfection, not applause, but a woman standing in the quiet light of her own life, breathing fully for the first time. And if you ask me what she felt in that final moment when the mirror no longer looked like an enemy, when the old name had fallen away, when the future no longer felt like punishment, when every wound and every risk and every hard-won truth gathered into one steady pulse beneath her skin, I can answer without hesitation because I was there and I am still there, and the answer is simple. I felt born.